Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. Do you feel guilty because your life is generally happy and well adjusted? Are you mentally well balanced and, generally speaking, of a more cheerful disposition? Do you think it's time that you acquired a certain level of existential pain and are you in danger of mistaking that pain and suffering for profundity and emotional meaningfulness? Well then, boy, have I got a treat for you. It is Allan Petterson's String Concertos. 3 of them. Just in case the first one doesn't take, you've got 2 more attempts. Okay, now, as I have mentioned previously in my discussion of Pedersen's 8th Symphony, it is music for those who wish to be made, shall we say, more reflective. I could have said more miserable, and I did then, and a bunch of you said, no, it's not miserable. Well, yes, it is miserable. Pedersen's life was pretty miserable. He actually insisted that his music was not miserable, that his music was simply a reportage, the deeply reflective and personal consideration on the human condition. And that human condition was basically wretched, and so the music expressed that accordingly. But here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that these string concertos are all early works. The first was written in 1949. The third was completed in 1957. In that period, Pedersen had begun his musical output with the first concerto and a couple other works. And then in 1951, he went to Paris, or 1950, 51, somewhere in there, to study with the famous dodecaphonist René Leibowitz, who wrote that wonderful article, Trashing Sibelius, that I read aloud to you in a previous video. He also studied with Messiaen and with Honegger. Honegger is really sort of the important guy here, actually, because if you know Honegger's Second Symphony, which is also for string orchestra with a trumpet and the chorale at the end, that is sort of the iconic work on which Pedersen based the sound world of these string concertos. In other words, nasty, gnarly, dissonant string writing. Of course, Honegger is quite concise, whereas Pedersen tends to be more expansive. Honegger is contrapuntally rigorous, and Pedersen really is not. Honegger is extremely careful in his control and shaping of form, whereas Pedersen's sense of form is all over the place. He would not have admitted that, of course, but he wrote an essay about the form of the very, very long third concerto, which is included in the notes to this CPO recording, from which I can play you some examples. And that essay is just as formless and difficult to read as the music is to listen to. The 3 string concertos play for about, the first 2 play for like 22 to 25 minutes each, a little bit more. But the third, it's nearly an hour, with a half-hour long slow movement marked sad in the middle. Now, if you think that is going to be an easy listen, think again. Boy, are these pieces tough. They are so painful. Oh my God, they're excruciatingly painful. You know, I remember the first time I saw live Bartók's music for strings, percussion, and celesta. This was in Baltimore, the Baltimore Symphony, when I was in college in the late 70s and early 80s. And one of the things I read in the program notes was, in the first movement fugue, Bartók carries the art of dissonant canonic string writing to its apex. And I just remember thinking to myself, this is the most god-awful, ugly thing I ever heard in my life. Who would want to carry the art of dissonant contrapuntal canonic string writing to its apex? I mean, didn't Bartók have anything better to do? Well, I kind of get that sense when I hear Pedersen. Now, I have since come to adore the Bartók. The Bartók is just a shattering masterpiece, and that opening fugue is amazing, absolutely amazing, terrifying and amazing. And the rigorous formal control that Bartók applies is all the more fascinating because the expression is so gripping. But Pedersen, I don't know. This stuff, it stops and it starts, and it's not that the music is dissonant. It's incredibly dissonant. Let's not make any mistake here. But it is, after its fashion, motivic or melodic. It's not that you can't follow it. It's that Pedersen, inserts just enough tonal anchorage so that you realize just how dissonant and miserable it is. It's the contrast that makes it so depressing. And it really is. This is just grim, miserable music. There's the word, miserable. I used it. Had to come out somewhere. Let me give you an example. I'll give you an example. Let's listen. This is each of these works has been recorded 2 or 3 times. And the available recordings, the earlier ones, I believe they were on Caprice of numbers 2 and 3. I haven't seen them in years. But there are wonderful new recordings. First on CPO with the Deutsche Kammerakademie Neuss under Johannes Goritsky. And I thought initially that these weren't as good as these, but they really are. It's very hard to choose between them. These are a little slower. These are a little quicker. Depends on how you take your unhappiness, shall we say. And then the Nordic Chamber Orchestra, the fabulous Nordic Chamber Orchestra under Christian Lindberg on 2 separate BIS CDs. This is a 2 CD set. Here you get only the string concertos, and here you get the string concertos plus an orchestration of some of the barefoot songs, the 8 barefoot songs orchestrated by Antal Dorati, who was a big early proponent of Pedersen while he was in Sweden. In fact, it was Dorati's performances and recordings of Pedersen that brought attention to his later work. And as I said, the interesting thing about his later work is that the symphonies for which he's now famous, that is numbers 7 and 8 primarily, they're much easier to listen to than these string concertos. Much easier, because they have, first of all, a greater number of tonal elements and a wider range of contrast and color. Here you're only dealing with strings, and he's punishing us every step of the way. Oh, the pain, my God, the pain. So let's have some samples. I think maybe that will give you a better sense of what you're going to be up against if you should decide to sample this music. So first of all, let's listen to a bit of the end of the first movement of the very first string concerto. It may remind you of something iconic. Here is the Deutsche Kammerakademie Neuss. Yes, oh boy, under Johannes Goritsky on CPO. Go for it. It was so amazing. You would think that good old Bernard Herrmann had heard this when he came to write Psycho, wouldn't you? It has that kind of sound to it. Of course, the Psycho bits are short segments, and even if you listen to the film score in larger bits, you're not going to get anything like the shower scene for 20 minutes on end, which is what Pedersen gives you. But you get a sense of it, I think, and it's really remarkable. Really remarkable. There's no way, by the way, I don't think that Herrmann could have known Pedersen at this time. I don't think anybody knew Pedersen at this time, and by the time people did know Pedersen, it was not these string concertos that people knew. Now, the second movement rises to heights of cheerfulness, relatively speaking. It's all relative. And the central movement of the second string concerto is marked dolce and tranquillo, and dolce and sweetly and tranquil and peaceful. And it's a veritable oasis of calm, not to say happiness. No, it never gets that far. Here's a little bit of the slow movement so you can get a sense of how the otherwise unhappiness and grayness is rendered in slightly, very slightly, more palatable circumstances. Here you go. Yes, finally, we come to number 3. Let me take the booklet out here so that this isn't reflecting so badly. There's not really much I can do about it because the booklet doesn't reproduce the cover of the box. But that's okay. You'll get a sense of it anyway. Now, as I said, number 3 lasts nearly an hour. A fun-filled hour of absolutely lacerating, wrist-slitting, total, complete unhappiness and misery. Oh, why not? I just have to bite the bullet. Yes, misery. It is misery that he is expressing in the most, well, there's also rage and fury. I mean, pick your bouquet of negative emotions. They're all here. Here's the opening of the finale, the jolly, bouncy finale of String Concerto number 3. Brace yourself. Well, if that hasn't sold you, I don't know what will. This is the best possible case to be made for these works. So, why am I talking about them, given the fact that maybe 2 people in the universe might be interested in them? Well, I have to say, first of all, they've been superbly recorded here, number 1. Number 2, Pedersen is a major 20th century voice. He is a major symphonist. I might be talking about more of those symphonies later on down the line. I actually enjoy a lot of his music. I really do. And even these string concertos have a certain, I would say, obstinate unattractiveness that I kind of respect. I actually admire. Remember, I was talking about musical fluff in connection with Massenet's orchestral music. Pedersen has no fluff. None. Zero. He really needs some. He could really stand to inject a little bit of fluff into his music. And the interesting thing about these works for me is that Pedersen has this reputation for writing music of increasing grimness and misery, but that's not true at all. The fact is, he was just as grim and nasty and gnarly from the very start. If anything, his symphonies became a little bit easier. I mean, the second and third string concertos were written between the third and fourth symphonies. He was already on his way as a symphonist, and even before he contracted rheumatoid arthritis and was basically crippled for the rest of his life and had, a life of, amazing neglect and misery and suffering and all of those things. He was just as gnarly and nasty as he later became. And that tells us something. It tells us something essential. It tells us that, in a way, Pedersen was right. His music was not a reflection necessarily of his personal suffering. I mean, yes, his father was an alcoholic blacksmith who used to beat the crap out of the whole family. He had a difficult childhood and upbringing, but in his musical career, at least in this period when he was a violist, an orchestral violist, he was pretty successful. And he was pretty well respected. And his music was still agonizing, absolutely agonizing. So it just goes to show that there was something in there that determined the kind of composer that he was going to be from the very start. And I kind of admire that. He had his voice, he had his way of doing things, and he stuck to it obstinately from the beginning to the very, very end. And that means something when somebody is gifted musically and does it with such consistency. I mean, really, absolute consistency. Are you going to want to listen to these pieces very often? No. No. You're there. No. Are you going to want to listen to them ever? Possibly not. But I do feel I have an obligation to at least tell you that they exist and suggest that if you're really looking for something to make you feel happy by contrast, to let you know that no matter how bad your life gets, it can always be worse, then the Pedersen string concertos are definitely something worth considering. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this light and fluffy discussion of the Pedersen string concertos. Take care.